All right, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for this month's SEA Development Seminar. My name is Kalilu Fofana. I'm a board member of Staff Employee Association. I'm over training and development. But before I get started, and before we introduce our guest speaker, I would like to go over a few housekeeping items. Please keep your microphones on mute unless you have a question. And then also this event will be recorded. So if you don't feel comfortable asking questions directly, please chat me privately or Team Olsen, and I'll make sure that your question get answered. Also, feel free to write in the chat whenever you have any questions or comments. We'll be running from about 12 to 1 o'clock, and then we'll open it up for questions from 1 to 1:15. I'm now gonna go ahead and introduce our speaker. Erika-Danielle Lindström, we are super excited to have her here today. She's a sociology doctoral student at Utah State University, focusing on social inequality. She's also the gender and sexuality coordinator for the USU Inclusion Center. And her role is to support our LGBT+ and allied community through advocacy and education, leadership and community building events too. We're super excited to have her here today. Please join me in welcoming her.
Well, thank you so much, everybody, and especially on a Friday at noon. Thank you for giving me some of your time today. I'm excited for this today. I'm going to share my screen really quick just so you can see my PowerPoint, and let's get it started. All right. So again, my name is Erica. My pronouns are she and her. And so I'm the Gender and Sexuality Coordinator in the Inclusion Center. The Inclusion Center is actually located over in the TSC, room 315, and we're open from 8 to 5. So if you ever have questions, you would like to stop by, see what our resources we offer for our students, not only just our students, but our staff, our faculty, and community members, please come and stop on by. So before we actually start and dive into LGBT 101, I wanted to give an acknowledgement of the place that we are at in the land. And this is our official USU land acknowledgement statement. USU is a land grant institution. And for those that are not familiar with that, that means that back before USU became founded as a university here, the federal government set aside different lands throughout the United States for higher education. With that, the lands were not unoccupied. They were occupied by other tribes, other like past and present. And so I just wanted us to give a time of silence to just acknowledge where we are, what our space is for our past, our present, and then also our future. Thank you. All right, with that, before we get to dive in and have some fun today, I just want to give you a little bit of ground rules. Right now, this is normally presented in first person and things, so we're doing it virtual. I also understand that if you need to use your phones, you can do that. But today, I want you to feel free to ask any and all questions that you've always wanted to know, have clarifying concerns about, things like that. Feel free during this presentation, if you have any questions, again, that you can private chat it, you can send it, or don't, I won't be able to see your private chat, so please send it to Tim Olsen or Kaluo. Also, if there's anything, don't worry about necessarily if it's worded the most appropriate. My bigger thing is that you have a space today to ask questions. The next ground rule for today is also believe the best in others. And so what this means is if someone asks a question and it's probably not worded in the best way possible, we're going to believe the best that the reason someone is asking a question today is really to gain understanding, to broaden what they know, or also it's because they want to be able to serve others in a different capacity. So let's believe the best in what the questions are being asked. And then also the same thing is please don't freeze anyone in time. And what I mean by that today is You may have colleagues right now in this session that you work with on a daily basis, weekly basis, or you see them in different capacities and or limited capacities too. And if someone asks a question, please don't only relate to them in that one question. We are all in our own journeys and professional development are growing. And so if you were to ask me questions of what Erica was like 10 years ago, very different than the Erica I am now. And it's the same thing with each other. So if there's questions asked today, please we're kind of in a journey together and we're going to be growing together today. With that, let's go on and dive into some fun stuff. So my first acronym here is when we talk about LGBT 101. LGBT is an acronym for, it has a couple of things here. I think if you can see my mouse, is we have an overall umbrella here, and it's for queer. And so queer, what that means is within the LGBT community, some individuals may not necessarily use the word queer for themselves. It's definitely a self-identifier, but as an overall, many people, especially in younger generations, are starting to embrace queer in a more expansive way, because queer doesn't put individuals in boxes. It can be something that challenges the notion of gender. It can be the notion of sexuality. It can be not necessarily a label, but it's challenging preconceived notions of something that's not within that. And so within that, with the LGBT, we not only just have sexualities, we also have genders. So for the T right here, this stands for transgender. And so an individual that was assigned, for instance, female at birth, and their gender identity is that they're male, and they're attracted to someone that is female, that would be a straight sexual orientation. And so doesn't necessarily mean that your gender automatically encompasses your sexual orientation as something else. And so that's something to be aware and cognizant of when we think about the queer community as a whole. And so we're going to be diving in today on different things, different terms. I'm going to have kind of challenges for you all, just some different reflection. So at any time, please feel free to ask questions. I'm excited to be here. So we'll go on in. All right. So I want you to think right now on your own experiences and stuff. And if anyone wants to share, what do you think the difference is between sexual orientation, sex, and gender? So I'm going to go on and dive in a little bit. As you're thinking about those, I'm going to give you a little bit of a cheat sheet. I warn you now, I love my unicorn, so you'll see some of those throughout this. But sexual orientation, in layman's terms, are really simple, and we're going to dive into this much deeper, is someone who you're attracted to, whether it's emotional or physical. Sex is the chromosomes and things as well that someone determined who you were before you were born or after you were born. And gender is a social construct. It's what you identify as, or if guy, female, or somewhere else in the binary of that too. And again, just as a reminder, I cannot see your chat, so you'll need to send that directly. But at the end of this presentation, I will look through those chats. And if there's something, private question, I will definitely dive into that together. So as I mentioned before, we need to go a lot deeper into that, because with gender studies and for gender and sexuality studies, it is much more complicated. And so we're going to kind of go into there. So I will be using some different terms today, and this will help you as well when you're describing individuals, yourself, or others included. And so the first one is sex assigned at birth. And what this is it's a medically assigned identity based on physical packaging, chromosomes, hormones, or genitalia. And what this means is when you were born, a medical professional or someone else decided and looked at your biology and determined that you fit in one of these three different categories. They either assigned you male, female, or intersex. Intersex is where they can either have different chromosomes or different genitalia combinations or different things like that. So within that, when we talk about individuals, especially saying sex assigned at birth is the most accurate, because again, it's not something that an individual chose or selected. It was something placed upon them as soon as they were born. Especially when we talk about like our trans populations and things like that, or our gender, like gender fluid or non-binary, describing an individual as sex assigned at birth is the most accurate way to do it, because again, if that's even needed. Most conversations, about 99% of your interactions with another individual, especially if they are not cisgender, you will not actually ever need to describe about their sex assigned at birth. But if for something for research or things like that, that is the most accurate term to use, phrasing. So gender identity is that inner sense of being man, woman, or another gender. It's how the mind and heart regard the body. So for instance, with the sex assigned at birth, that is what others told you that who you are. Your gender identity is what you are taking from, whether gender as itself is a social construct. We make very different rules about it. For example, pink at one time was the most masculine color you could think of, where blue was the most feminine. Over 100 years ago, if you wore wigs, high heels, and makeup and things, you were a founding father, where now it might be considered within the drag. So gender identity and the gender itself is a social construct of who you are identifying and what you're seeing. So it can be man, woman, non-binary, gender queer, to dive in that one, or gender, and then also like gender fluid. Is some individuals, when I introduced my pronouns earlier of she, her, some individuals with like gender fluid, those can change. Their pronouns can change. It can be something hourly. It can be something weekly. It could be something monthly. It could be years. It could be situational that their pronouns are changing. And so again, it's not necessarily something that we've always been taught and trained, is that we put things in boxes. It makes it so much easier. It's just how the schemas and our like mapping in our minds work. But with gender and sexuality, it's a whole spectrum and a wider range. And so with gender identity of identifying, for instance, I don't know if you could see the screen earlier, but if you notice, I'm wearing a tie. I typically, with my gender identity, gender identity does not align with my gender expression. We're going to dive into that next. So with gender expression, it's how the ways we externally communicate our gender to others. It can be clothes, hair, mannerisms, the way our voice is utilized, body language, for example, feminine, masculine, androgynous. And going back to that other example, for me, and I will use examples of me for most of this presentation, and at any time, feel free to ask questions about that. I was assigned female at birth. My gender is female, but my expression is very masculine. And for me, it doesn't necessarily mean that my expression, it relates with what my gender is. And so a lot of times you will, if you ever come over to the office or things, you will definitely see me either in like ties, more masculine, or what's constructed as masculine things. But my pronouns are she, her. And so that's one of those things that just because someone's expression may look like it's someone's female presenting, male presenting, androgynous, gender fluid, or all these different things, it's one of those things we always want to challenge ourselves to make sure that we are checking our pronouns and usage and never assuming another thing about someone's expression, because that doesn't necessarily equate to their gender. Does anyone have any questions right now?
I have a question real quick.
Yes, please do.
So I guess two kind of questions. Would it be better if we were unsure to just ask, or would it be better to use like they, them pronouns for somebody?
You're actually right on both counts. So thank you for asking that. So one of the things to do, and it's something that I had to actually train myself too, because I was very different for me to introduce myself, is when working with other individuals that you're meeting, I always like, instead of calling someone out, what I usually do is I say, hi, my name is Erica. I'm she, her. It's kind of gotten to the point that a lot of people think my last name is she, her, and it's okay. So one of the things when working with individuals is you announce your pronouns. If the other individual wants to say their pronouns, they can. If not, that's okay too. In the cases where someone hasn't given their pronouns, they, them is a good neutral pronoun usage, even for someone that looks like they were like this, like for someone that's cisgender too. It's not a negative thing. If someone were to contact and reference me as they, them, that's okay. And when in doubt, you can use they, them. And then once someone is like, oh, actually my pronouns are this, then utilize those pronouns instead. But they, them is a good neutral one. And the only exemption of that is if someone does not utilize pronouns at all. And in that case, you just utilize their name. So for instance, it would, if I did not use pronouns at all, you would introduce me as like, this is Erica, this is Erica's backpack, or this is Erica's this, Erica does this. That's a very small portion of the population. I personally haven't encountered, but it's one of those things to just know that if someone says that they don't utilize pronouns, utilize their name. But yes, thank you so much for asking that.
Thank you for answering. That was helpful.
Yes, no, please do. Ask away. We're going to go into some more terms and we'll go from there. And if other questions are coming up, please feel free. So sexual orientation, this one's fun. It's an enduring, emotional, romantic, sexual, affectional, and relational or attraction to other people. It's determined by how a person self-identifies. So for instance, has anyone heard of the myth of the gaydar? So gaydars don't exist as much as like my family thinks it was when they were trying to figure out me. But it's something that we utilize as a tool to kind of force people into like acting a certain way, being a certain way. And if someone's outside of that, but with sexual orientation, the individual self-selects. So for instance, if I am holding a hand of a woman, I'm dating a woman, but I say my gender is assigned and my gender is that I'm woman, does not necessarily make me a lesbian or bisexual or pansexual or anything else. If I say I'm straight, even though I'm doing those actions, then my sexual orientation is I'm straight. So a lot of times we like to assign people based on their actions, but with a sexual orientation, it is the individual that is determining what their sexual orientation is. And again, I love with this definition, noting that it doesn't always have to be physically related for someone to be attracted to someone else. They could have a strong emotional or romantic attraction. So it doesn't necessarily equate to having sex. But within that too, it also, we want to recognize our asexual individuals as well. Because again, that's a different orientation where that also falls within this realm. And so some of the examples on here are lesbian, gay, bisexual, queer, asexual, pansexual, straight. There are so many different ones and there's more sexual orientations coming out. And what that means is those orientations that are kind of newer that we're seeing on the internet or like other connections, doesn't mean that those orientations never existed before and they just started now. It's just with our technology and the way we're getting more connected and having more resources to explore, there's more dialogues where people are starting to have moments of like, oh, wait, here's this thing. And also I want to be known with sexual orientation. Some people that if they fall within the queer community, they may not have realized their orientation. And so they either had an aha moment, is what I like to joke and call, or they started to realize something is different. And I want that to make sure that that's not the same as someone changing their sexual orientation in the sense of, in many states, including Utah, there is conversion therapy that is not regulated, where in the past, and it's still being used, about 50, up to about 60 years ago, lobotomies were sanctioned, that someone could get a lobotomy because to try to attempt to change someone's sexual orientation to become straight. There's a great documentary called Cured, if you want to learn more about what that was. Same thing where individuals in the past have, and still in some places here in the States, they can still go through electric shock therapy where, for instance, where I am a lesbian, if for that therapy, it would be something where they show a picture of a female, and every time I see a female, I would be shocked. And then if they show a male, I wouldn't. There are several different medical organizations that have condemned this and noting, and I want that to be known that someone realizing and exploring their sexuality and realizing their sexual orientation is very different than someone that has realizes their sexual orientation, has assigned that for themselves, and then trying to become straight. I used to joke before I was out at home that when I would go home, I have to go home and straighten up. It's not a real thing. So I want to make sure that we know when I use some of these terms that the sexual orientation might be something where an individual could be in their college years. It could be in much later on in life that they realize this. I've talked to individuals that were in their 50s, their 60s, and having moments where their sexual orientation was much broader than they originally had thought. So kind of going back, again, I warned you, I promise this is the last unicorn for this presentation, but I like having just different visuals. So we're going to break down all of those terms of what I showed you, just to kind of give you a baseline, because it gets much more expansive in the queer community, but we're not going to go too far into it today. But with this one, the Gender Unicorn has some really great resources on here. So we're going to go break this down. So sex assigned at birth. So for me, a doctor looked at me, they thought I had really big ears, but they also assigned me that I was female, and I still am. But my gender identity is also female, so falls on here. But I want you to notice that there's different spectrums and different ranges. There can also be other genders where someone can be agender and not necessarily fall into either of these boxes, or they could fall within some of these. They could be a completely different gender expression and gender identity altogether. With the expression, as I mentioned before, most of my presentation is very masculine. So even though my gender identity is very strong right here for female, my expression is very strong masculine. Physically attracted for me would be for women. And then I'm also happen to be emotionally attracted to women. But again, with these spectrums and these ranges, it can change and vary by the individual. So it's always good to make sure that we're not making assumptions, because there's all these more deeper levels that are going on with that. So I want to talk about some language of what we can say and what not to say. Some of these terms that you'll see on the far left were actually appropriate in literature for different times. But again, with language, it's evolving, it's living. And so some of the words that may have been appropriate before are not necessarily appropriate now. And so I kind of want to talk about a couple of things that, that we can do better about. So in many literature and things like that, sorry about that. You will see like things like hermaphrodite, and instead it's intersex. And so a lot of some of the words that we have that we no longer use is because they were medicalized. And so, as I mentioned before about like lobotomies, electric shock therapy, some of these words have been weaponized and for individuals that received extreme discrimination. And so that's the reason we want to take those away and have a lot more ownership and be a more safer environment for individuals. So homosexual is more like from propaganda that you would see in older films of like, here's a homosexual in their natural habitat. I don't know what that means. So if you know that their orientation is gay, they have given you permission. That's another key thing, that they are openly out. Please refer to their orientation of what they say. So if it's gay, lesbian, bisexual, things like that. But again, it kind of goes back to those diagnoses. Another one that we've seen is born female or born male, female bodied, male bodied. In more literature, you're going to see an FT, the letters FTM or MTF. And what those stand for are female to male and male to female. And those, again, are also problematic components, because with those, it's something about an individual that we cannot control what gender we were, like what sex we were assigned at birth. That is outside of our realm. And it's also referring to an individual of something they couldn't control in their past. And we like to use present day language when we're talking about others. And so again, it's very rare that you will ever actually need to know what they were assigned before and working with that individual of what they are present. So a gay or a transgender, just leaving it like that. We want to have more inclusive. So gay and transgender are adjectives to describe a person. So it's not a gay or that. Another one is transgender people and normal people. Again, there's that whole othering. So instead it'd be transgender people and cisgender people. So cisgender is where you were assigned a sex at birth. Your gender also aligns with that. And so, for instance, if you, for me, I'm cisgender. I was assigned female at birth for my sex. My gender is I am female. And so I am cisgender. And so other things are both genders. As I showed you earlier, there's not just one or two or three, there's a whole spectrum, or opposite genders. So you can say all gender. Other things to work on, and this is kind of a product, not just within the queer community, but just in our language and vernacular, using those binaries of ladies and gentlemen. Instead, we can do everyone, folks, honored guest, being more inclusive. And it's the same thing with expectations on roles and occupations. So instead of mailman, fireman, policeman, you could do mail clerk, your firefighter, police officer. Another one is it. As I mentioned before, they, them is always a good neutral one. It is always referred to as a thing, and that's never, we never use that. So if you're not sure about the pronouns, using they. Are there any questions on some of these or anything that I've covered so far? Okay, we'll go into some more. Here's some other misused words. Lifestyle. Again, this was a very weaponized, the origin of this was weaponized in the sense of like, here's your lifestyle. It also has a connotation of like, it can be changed. And for me, for instance, we wouldn't talk about heterosexual lifestyle. It's not a lifestyle, it's just my life. This is who I am. And so taking that away, choice kind of goes back again, implies that sexuality can be changed, and it perpetuates a cured argument. And when do, like, to think about it, if you are not queer, when did you choose to be heterosexual? It was just something that you've naturally always known about yourself. And so choice implies that we're selecting something. Other one is same-sex attractions. Again, this has a history of being medicalized. It also is trying to separate part of our different identities. And so it's like something that is to be cured or to be changed, when in reality, it's part of the individual. And so it's very stigmatizing to hear. And so instead, if you need to talk about orientations, you can say sexual orientation for that. So I have a challenge for you. This one's going to be just kind of a personal in your space of where you are. But I would love, if you want to get out a paper, if you want to get out something on your phone or a Word document or whatever works, I want to give you the next couple minutes, and next 5 minutes is I want to give a challenge to see how many things you can write about yourself and have the most. So we have 77 participants today, and I want to see the biggest, like the highest number I've had is 30. And so what I mean by this is I just want to get you to have words about yourself. And so, for instance, you could list out your name. Do you have any pets? What's the pets' names? Do you have any siblings? Where do you work on the department? What's your hobbies? And so I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to see who's going to have the bragging rights. 30 is the number to beat. I think we can definitely do that, but I want you to list out what you know about yourself. I will keep giving you hints until the 5 minutes are up. So at 12:35, we're going to stop. But until then, you can think about, what's your favorite color? What's your favorite food? What is something you like, a food that you don't like? How would people describe you? How would you describe yourself? Are you from here in Utah? Are you from Logan? Are you from somewhere else? Do you have a faith tradition that's very important to you? Or do you have a code of ethics that you follow? I want you to keep thinking about that, and keep writing as many as you can. Just, it just doesn't have to be full sentences, just like can be a word of like, favorite color, blue, favorite food is this. But I want to see if you can do, try to get past 30. That has been the highest number that I've had in any of these participations so far. And so you can think about if you have children, or for instance, for the longest time, my pets were my kids. what like different hobbies you have. Do you like hiking, or do you like, for me, I've been like watching shows on Netflix. If there's a favorite Netflix show, you can list that out. Your mother's maiden name or social security number. Those are fun. I'm kidding. Please do not put those on there. But we have about 3 more minutes to see who can have the most. What inspires you? If you could travel anywhere, what is something that everyone knows about you or doesn't know about you? Can even be something about your name. Did someone name you? What's that mean? Why did you choose, of all the places to come and work, Utah State University? Where did you do, if you didn't go to Utah State for your undergrad, where did you go? Does pineapple go on a pizza or not? Something I've discovered here in Utah, there definitely seems to be a divide on whether the stuffing goes inside the turkey or it goes as a completely separate dish. You may have an opinion about that. Definitely put that one on there. Why did you, of all presentations and all the things you do with your time, why did you come to this presentation? And we have a little bit over a minute left on my clock. If you had a superpower, what would it be? If you did have siblings, what are their names? Do you have any holiday traditions right now that you're getting excited about? Okay, with that, I have time. Did anyone get 5 things about themselves? Imagine so. Who has, with that, did anyone make past 30?
I got 31. Yeah.
Nice. Thank you. All right.
I got 43.
Oh, we got a 43. Oh, snap.
I am not worthy.
43. I just cut somebody off. I'm so sorry. Is there anyone?
We've got a 55 in the chat.
Oh, snap. Oh
I
my goodness.
55.
Oh, this is why I love working with staff. You beat the students. This is awesome. Okay. Wow. Is there anything higher than that? All right. Well, congratulations. And those that didn't get the 30, that is okay. That was the challenge to have. And I promise you are not going to be shamed about it. So I want you to think about this right now. If I gave you this challenge and I had this magical wand right now, I want you to look at however you recorded your responses, whether they were just there on the form, if you did a Word document, I usually do that, or your phone, or if it was a pencil and paper. I want you to look at that, and I want you to picture for the next month, every time you went into a meeting or met someone new, everything on that list you could not ever mention about yourself. So if you put on there your name, you could never tell anyone for that whole month that that's your name. If you mention that you have children, you can never talk about them. If you mention a specific faith tradition, you couldn't talk about them. If you mention a certain type of food that you like, you could never talk about it. Or if you had certain hobbies. So I want you to start thinking about it in that terms of looking at that list. Would that be something easy for you? I want you to think about how would those conversations be about? So with that, I want you to think about some of those might be easy. Like it may be that not everyone needs to know that your favorite hobby is hiking or you love underwater basket weaving. One, making baskets are hard. So if that is your hobby, that is amazing. But some of the bigger challenges is something that if on that list, it might be something that you really listed that's something significant about you, about who you are, and you couldn't mention that. So I want you to think about that paper. I know this is something that doesn't make sense right now, but I want to bring that into something else. So right now, I want to talk to you all about coming out. So the reason we did that list, whether you're within the queer community yourself, or if you are not, is with coming out, if someone is not out, whether it is their sexuality or their gender or things like that, every interaction, it's not just for a month. Every interaction is very calculated of who you can tell what. So it may not necessarily seem like a big deal if you mentioned a hobby, but if someone is, for instance, they are not out and they have a significant other, they may feel pressure that they can't talk about like, hey, this weekend I went hiking, because they're terrified that they're going to ask, who did you go hiking with? It may be something, so every day we have in sociology, they talk, and also in theater, there's an on stage and off stage. Every interaction we have with someone, we are on stage. So what we tell others is that on stage, what we want other people to know about us. Depending on if someone you know, you're really great friends with and everything like that, your on stage may be large, that they know so much about you. And those are those details that you don't tell a complete stranger. In those cases, your backstage is large and your on stage is, you're still trying to build up that trust, relationship connections and things like that. But if someone is closeted, again, every interaction is a challenge. So I want you to know that with the coming out process, it's continuous. You don't just one day say, I'm out, I'm done. It's continuous, every space, because we're in a society that people assume that someone is straight or someone is cisgender. If like they have passing or if there's this gaydar, we have different things, but that is something that can be very challenging for individuals and what that looks like. So again, people may be out in some spaces and in others. As I mentioned earlier, when I joked when I would go home to Kentucky, if you're from Kentucky, yes. But I would joke because in some spaces here and other places that I lived before going home, I was fully out there. But when I went home, I had to be very careful what I talked about, what is that mention and things like that. And for some people, before they even come out, they have to really process what that looks like for them. Does their community going to accept them? For instance, is it something they're going to have to navigate with their faith tradition? Is it something that they're going to have to navigate with their family and things? For instance, I work predominantly with undergraduate and graduate students, but I also work with faculty and staff. So please utilize me and you can come to me. But we're individuals. Some of our undergraduate students, when they come out, they are terrified that their family is going to disown them. In some cases, their family fully financially cuts them off from their education. We have different things where individuals coming out is the big act of courage, and staying in the closet is also a big act of courage. So whether someone is out or not, they're not any less valid. It's for safety reasons. For instance, for a statistic that's very heartbreaking is for Black trans women in 2021, the average life expectancy is 35. Last month, we had our Trans Day of Remembrance, where we had over 300 individuals that we know of that have been that were killed. There are many laws on the books. For instance, here in the state of Utah, there is the Trans and Gay Defense Panic Act. And in those means that if someone comes out as trans, an individual can assault or kill them and utilize a defense of, oh, I was fearing for my life, for my safety. So the queer community is very marginalized and also has to figure out the safety of what can it look like. So knowing that, if someone comes out to a friend of yours but doesn't come out to you, also know that that's not necessarily something that's on you. It can also be something where they're looking for symbols or they're navigating on things. It's not a reflection of you. It's just where they're at. So if someone does come out to you, it's a huge privilege that they do so. So one of the things is, please don't do what my family did. I laugh and joke about this. So when I came out to my family, my older sister was like, man, we've had bets on you for years. It was like, oh, hurtful, true, but hurtful. So just knowing that, don't ask probing questions, just give the individual space. So if someone comes out to you for like whatever they disclose to you, be like, thank you so much for sharing. How can I support you? Who knows? What is it that you need from me in this space? And it may just be the fact that they could share that with you. And then the fact that they just got acceptance from you of like, oh, you're a safe individual. So knowing that the coming out process is continuous, and always respect and guard and safeguard that in your respective roles. It may be something where, again, when they share it to you, because they see you as a leader or they see you as someone. Some of the other things worth coming out, individuals are going to look for signs and symbols and things from you to know if you are safe, if you're coming out. So in instance, my examples is the people I came out to, I was looking. So did they have like pride stuff? Did they have progress? Or what was it like? They didn't necessarily have to have those symbols, but if someone was saying something homophobic or transphobic, where they are the ones going, hey, that's not cool. Let's talk about that. And standing up that way. So that person, I know that they're like, I can go and talk to them. So those are some of the key things there. And so why this is important, acceptance versus rejection. I'm going to kind of read these stats to you. So individuals that are rejected within the queer community, young people, are more than 8 times as likely to attempt suicide, nearly 6 times as likely to report high levels of depression, more than 3 times as likely to use illegal drugs, more than 3 times as likely to be at high risk for HIV and sexually transmitted diseases. However, if a queer individual is accepted, queer young adult people who are not rejected are no more likely to experience these negative effects as their non-queer peers. So that is why it's so important we talk about accepting others and giving them the spaces, because when someone feels that they're completely rejected, they don't have a community, the isolation, the aloneness, as we know that with 2020, with COVID and things of how that impacted our own mental health, it has a huge impact here. So here's some other statistics as well. So up to 40% of homeless youth population are LGBT compared to the overall population, especially with our younger demographics. Many are kicked out of their homes. Many are hearing different messages here, like in their groups and wherever they work, and hearing all these different like microaggressions as well. And here at Utah State University, there was a STEM graduate student climate survey in 2016. And here were some of the findings that we found as a campus. 31% of our queer students have experienced bias, discrimination, or harassment based on their sexual orientation. 70% of our queer students have been the target of negative verbal comments at USU. 46% of our queer students would not recommend their program to a friend. 46% of queer students would select a different university if they made the choice again. And that's something that we can, as a staff, to help support our students to know that they're here. And then we as a staff can also support our coworkers and others that we work with in our community members to make sure that we can change these statistics. It's like, for instance, on campus here, I've had students where they're giving slurs when they're just out at Walmart shopping. We've had it though at the same time where they're walking by, someone says something really homophobic and the friends are like, hey, what do you mean by that? And that gives our hope. It's not so much like the comments being made. Students and others, including myself, we're listening to who steps up, who says that that comment was not appropriate and said, because like someone could say, oh, I'm just joking. But unless everyone is having a great time with that comment, then it's not a joke. And so here's some of the things that we can do. The fact that you're all here today and are giving me space, especially on a Friday afternoon, is amazing, incredible. Thank you all for being here. So I want you to continue to educate yourself about LGBTQIA+ topics. For instance, even though I'm a gender and sexuality coordinator, I have so much more to learn. I'm continuously learning the vernacular changes, the dialogues. So please don't think that once you've gone to a couple of trainings, you can check off that box. It's something that with everything that the more we know, the more we need to educate ourselves. Don't assume everyone is heterosexual or cisgender. Gender neutral language is the best. Some of the other things is legal name versus real name. And so dead naming is if someone's name has changed. Let's say, for instance, my name is Erica. That was like the name my parents assigned me. But then if I was trans and my name changed and someone keeps referring to me as Erica, that's dead naming. That is part of my past and not where I am present in things. So we make sure that when students or like other individuals, our coworkers or colleagues ask their name, ask pronouns, like you could do it like, my name is this, my pronouns are this. Example yourself, so that way the other individuals can feel comfortable having that. And so always introduce yourself with pronouns. Some of the things you can do is if you have name badges here at USU, you can get your pronouns added to those. It's the same thing. You can do pronouns on your door. If you're looking for things, next semester, we'll be rolling out our new updated allies training. And with that, you can get an ally sticker that you can place on your office or another location. And it's the same thing. We also have a Trans 101 training that's been updated that we'll be rolling out next semester. And we'll have those through our Inclusion Center website that you can sign up for. Also keep an eye open for internalized or systematic homophobic, transphobic things and do something about it. For instance, some of the initiatives that are coming out with several different partners on campus is we do have some gender inclusive restrooms, but we don't have one in every building. So for instance, if someone is trans and they come over to the TSC or in our office, the nearest bathroom for that individual would be to go all the way down from the 3rd floor outside to the basement of the University Inn. And some individuals were like, hey, how can we do these things, like change that? So the TSC will be getting a restroom soon. We have a community mapping. And like another example was, I didn't know this on our Canvas page for students, is it only gave 3 options for pronouns, he, she, or they. And there's so many more pronouns out there that when a student notified me, I reached out to others that had more of a like understanding of how Canvas works. And within 24 hours that got changed. And it was from those individuals going, oh yeah, let's do this. So it's one of those things that in thinking about your space, how can that be inclusive? How can you be the example? And what can you set for that tone for what will be appropriate behavior when you're working with others and what's not the appropriate behavior? And so with that, I want to give you all time to ask any and all questions, but also talking about some of our other resources. So in the Inclusion Center, as you're thinking about your questions, we do offer support groups. We have an LGBT support group. We're looking to do a trans support group, trans non-binary gender fluid support group for students. We do awareness days. We do education. We have service. We have an allies on campus, as I mentioned before. We have a student-run Queer Student Alliance for students by students. We have an LGBTQIA+ and allies hangout lounge. For our students, we offer free computer prints and computer access. We offer leadership and scholarship opportunities. And then I'm the full-time gender and sexuality coordinator, but I also want you to know that if you go on our website and you would like to get on our email listserv, we will give you things like if you want to be an ally or if you want our LGBT specific one. Again, I send the information on either one, so it's not that one is versus the other, but what this will do is get you connected if you're looking for more allyship opportunities. We do ally socials where individuals, faculty and staff can talk about what can we do as a collaboration. For instance, one collaboration that's come about from one of the socials was we have some staff members over in the library that are now creating a health sheet for queer individuals, because when coming to Cache Valley, if they don't know what healthcare providers are affirming versus which ones aren't, this is going to be a sheet that's given out that queer identifying individuals can fill this out of like what's been great experiences. And so that way we can create a new resource for individuals that are here for faculty, staff, everyone to utilize, that these were the great experiences and really recommend for things. So again, it's more what is it that you can all do, what we can do together, and all of that. And with that, I want to just thank you so much for this space and answer any and all questions you would like, if you have any new ones. And if you're okay, I'm going to stop sharing so I can see what my chats are, just to give those individuals the privacy too.
Erica,
Yes.
I had a question. So if we see something on campus, maybe a homophobic slur or something, does USU have yet like policies or rules against those? Is there anything like campus wide, like I know where to report like a sexual assault, I know I could figure out how to report something racist? Is there something in place for that on USU?
Great questions. Yes. So you can go on to like where to report like a sexual assault or Title IX. We also have a campus climate survey. So there's different ways of reporting if you personally have received discrimination or if you've witnessed it. That can go, oh, and Amanda Castillo had just now posted in the link right here. Thank you for the Office of Equity that you can post there too.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think that's one of the biggest steps too, is making sure that we are reporting this instead of being complacent in it.
Yeah, Erica, thank you so much for a great presentation. It was very, very informative. I do have a question. During the presentation, you mentioned something about the death rate in the Black trans community. Why is it so high in the Black community?
Well, trans, like the age ranges, there's a couple things that go on with the, I'm going to quote Black feminist scholar Kimberly Crenshaw. We have to think about it as an intersectional framework. So with that, like within the trans community, for Trans Day of Remembrance here in the United States, we had 52, like specifically from last Trans Day of Remembrance of last November to this November, we had 52 deaths. And within that, some of the age ranges were like early 20s. So with trans deaths, some can also be because a lot of the United States laws do not protect trans individuals. So individuals can have workplace discrimination, they can be fired, housing, for instance, here like in Utah. So for instance, with a lot of private renters, if someone wants to rent like with their significant other and the landlord does not like it, they're not necessarily protected. In some states that's allowed. And so you have all these compound things that are going on of like job security, family acceptance, friends, relationships, all of those things combined. And then as far as specifically with the Black trans population, you also have like the compounded with racism, other microaggressions that are kind of going on. So it's like a death by 1,000 cuts. And then again, so you have all these different individuals. Sorry, I was looking at the comment. But so there's all of these other things that are kind of compounding on there in addition. But yes, race also has another impact on it, especially there is research studies that show like race does have an impact on medical treatment and medical results too. So knowing that there's all these other variables combining into that too. So great question.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I'm also going to put in the chat my email address. If there's some questions that come up later that you're not really sure of, I want you to always know that you can reach out or schedule a meeting if you'd like to talk face-to-face about things too. Because again, sometimes if you're like me, it's more, I like to process and then a day or two later, I'm like, oh, now I've formulated some questions, or I have a very specific situational thing of like with my work, can I do, for instance, how can I make this more inclusive, like the language that's being utilized on those reports, or what can I look like to do an audit for our space? Or how do I find those gender inclusive restrooms and have a map? So if someone is coming into my office or my space, that they can find that easily. Or what are our policies? What does that look like? How can I refer someone that's in crisis mode right now? Those things are there too. And also I'll be staying on here too, if you want to do private conversations. But yeah, this is more of a anything and everything. And believe me, you're not going to offend me if you have a particular question or scenario. I'm here to be a resource to you all.
I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for being vulnerable, letting us be learners and sharing, teaching. It's very important. Thank you.
Thank you. Like, it makes me excited when I see people attend these, because with our students, when they come here, I can give some anecdotal stories. Some of our students that this is the first time, and like, again, I keep referencing students, so I apologize. But with our students, when they come here, some of them, this is the most inclusive space they've been to. For instance, we had our first QSA board game night, and we had over 125 students come in that first week of classes. And then with that one, we had students that almost were crying, going, I thought I was the only one, and here's what representation looks like. Here's my space. It was the same thing when we had with Residence Life that partnered with the drag show. Some people, that was the first queer space that they've been to, and we're just excited to have that connectedness. And so the fact that you're all here, it makes me so excited, because there's only one of me. You're all the ones that have power. You have those relationships, whether it's your coworkers, it's community members in your own community, what you're doing. And the fact that you're here and wanting to create those spaces for others, or even just learning too, of like, I'm not sure where I'm at. The fact that you took that step to be here and be vulnerable too with me is huge. So thank you all. It makes me so excited.
Thanks, Erica. Hey, we had a question about the slides. Can we get a copy of those, or is there any way you can share those with us?
Definitely. Would it be something that I send it to you all, and then it can be on the SIA webpage? If I'm saying SIA right, I've always just been SEA.
SEA, yeah. You can either email them to me or Leslie, and then we'll take care of it from there.
Okay, perfect. We can definitely do that.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I was
If
just gonna
not-
say sharing in box might be a good option too for those slides.
Okay, yeah. Thank you, Dave. We'll definitely look into that.
Well, thank you all for joining us today, and thanks a lot for a great presentation, Erica. It was very informative, and we appreciate all you do for us.
And thank you all.